This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the newest edition in the Compliance Podcast Network, my latest podcast, Compliance and Coronavirus. As the voice of compliance, I wanted to start a podcast which will help bring both clarity and sanity to the field of compliance, the compliance practitioner, and indeed the compliance profession during this worldwide health and healthcare crisis. Taking up a variety of topics as diverse as working from home, to sporting events, to the role of the board of directors, to crisis management, to the role of supply chains. We will look at all of these in this podcast. If you have a topic you'd like covered on compliance and coronavirus, please let me know. I'd be happy to do a podcast on it. Today I visit with Julie Myers-Wood. Julie is the CEO of Guidepost Solutions, and we talk about international privacy laws and how those are impacting data transfers that need to occur during the time of coronavirus for companies to perform internal audits and investigation. It's a fascinating exploration of a current topic brought on by Covid-19. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and today I have with me Julie Myers-Wood. And Julie is the CEO at Guidepost LLC. We have visited before. It's been a while, so welcome back, Julie.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Tom.
So, Julie, one of the things that I'm trying to get information out on is how do we reopen? How do we reopen safely, sanely, obviously in compliance, but with an eye towards whatever the new normal might be. And you had some really interesting ideas that I have not seen before, so I really thought this would be a propitious time to explore them with you. And if I could start with asking you, how do you advise, or how does Guidepost advise its clients to begin to think through the reopening?
Well, first, that we advise clients to think through what they need. So in this new normal, there are some businesses which might continue on remotely and be just as profitable or close to just as profitable. And there are other businesses that depend very much on having customer contact and need to focus on the customer experience. So it's going to be different if you're dealing with a meatpacking plant versus a restaurant versus an office building in terms of what sort of considerations you have. But first and foremost, you have to think about employee safety and how can you make sure that those who are working for your company continue to be safe. And so you may have already made some changes if you have modified working conditions, perhaps at a meatpacking plant or some other sort of manufacturing facility. But if you are in an office environment and your whole office is now in a shelter from home, as governors and mayors start to open back up the communities, you have to think about what would it take to keep your employees safe if they come back into work, and how can we do that in a way that gives them trust and confidence. So I think that's the first thing you need to think about.
Julie, I think many companies have put together a coronavirus response team, but you were the first person I saw talking about a coronavirus or COVID-19 reopening team. So I was wondering how a company might think about that, whether they want to have an internal czar, whether you should have an executive leadership team. How should they think about that, structure it, and move forward with that concept?
Absolutely. I think it's critical to have a team or a czar that's focused on reopening and looks across your business to see what are the certain things that you might need to modify for physical security, for cybersecurity, and also in terms of business operations. It's important, in my view, to have a certain point person that is focusing on all the reopening issues. And so can make sure that if you make a change to your physical security, perhaps you're moving now to touchless entry versus having everyone, enter numbers on a touchpad. How would that affect, other things? And so how would that go into, potential cyber vulnerabilities that you need to focus on, or potential concerns around compliance? For example, if you have to track who's coming in a certain way to be compliant on export compliance. And so having really one person that's getting input from all the leads and all the teams can make sure that you're doing things consistently, and also make sure that you're not doing certain things regionally different on accident. it may make sense to have different protocols regionally or geographically, just based on safety concerns and, how the virus is manifesting itself in those regions. But you want to make sure that the different protocols are not accidental, but they're intentional. And so having someone that tracks this information, I think, is really key. And finally, I think you have to think of long term about potential liability or concerns about whether or not you thought through things in a wise way, both for employee safety and also for customer safety and customer experience. It may be the unfortunate case that someone gets sick after the business is reopened. And of course, you'll have to deal with contact tracing and dealing with the authorities, but you may also have to deal with litigation. We're seeing that with Carnival Cruises. We've seen it with Smithfield. I imagine there'll be more litigation alleging that businesses reopened in a thoughtless manner or did not fully plan things. And so having a reopening czar or a reopening committee that's gathering all the information, gathering all the metrics, best protects your company to show that you took all the steps that the authorities recommended, that you documented those, and you can prove those up when and if needed.
Julie, I think most of my listeners are going to be aware of Guidepost LLC and certainly well known for both monitorship and high-level sophisticated investigations as well. In the work that Guidepost does, some of it is done offsite, obviously, and some you have to do on site. How are you beginning to think through those issues with your clients?
Well, we have a large team of design engineers and security design engineers that work both on the physical security side and the cybersecurity side. So day to day, they are used to dealing with visitor access controls, protocols for employees, and we have redesignated this group to focus in on what is needed to ensure that reopening makes sense. So, for example, we're working with a major city and all of its courthouses. And they're thinking about, as they open those courthouses back up, changes do they need to make in terms of visitor access, employee protocols. Also, there's some places that are looking at, temperature screening. So we provided guidance on thermal imaging cameras and other technology that you may need to increase or decrease to avoid causing a problem in this area.
Julie, so I'm in Texas. Our governor wants to reopen the state in stages. Obviously, other governors have been aggressive or less aggressive in opening, or saying they're going to open their states. Are people having to think through these different phases of opening, even for business to business people like Guidepost and Tom Fox?
Absolutely, and I think Governor Abbott. Very wise to think through in Texas, opening in stages. Businesses should also think, what is necessary now? You may have found that there are certain portions of your business that operate efficiently remotely. Can you keep that going, or can you keep a larger amount of your team operating remotely than in the past? Or there's certain places where, in order for business needs and based on the safety indications that you're getting, you can start to open up, but it certainly, I would think, should be a phased approach, and you want to learn from whatever lessons there are from other portions of the country or other regions where you operate, what's been successful and what hasn't, so you can tweak things along the way. I mean, we've all seen that in practice, probably in the grocery stores. As I ventured out once a week to the grocery store, things have changed radically from week one, where almost no one had a mask, not the workers, not the people that were shopping in the store, to partitions, to everyone wearing a mask, to reduce numbers in the stores, and to various lines. I think as compliance people, one of our jobs, or someone's job in compliance, should be thinking about which of those things work effectively to encourage the mandated social distancing, and which of those things actually just cause customer traction and make the customer experience less good, or reduce the efficiency. If social distancing continues on for a long period of time, and we know that our medical advisors are saying that it may, we need to start not just blindly adopting every sort of practice, but looking at what's actually working and, tuning that, as we do in the financial crime space, tuning and tweaking for what is needed in order to be safe, and ensure the customer experience and ensure the business operations.
Julie, you brought up an interesting point that I had not really thought of, and this may be one of the first times in my life, where I was in a situation, or society or a country, even the world is in a situation where there's not a lot of guidance for us to draw upon. And it's not so much we're having to make it up on the fly, but we're having to learn from each other. And I really like the way you phrase that. And that's what's struck me about the different approaches governors have taken and said they will take, is it gives us an opportunity to learn from each other as well.
I think that's exactly right. And this is not something where you can set it and forget it. I mean, that's never the case in compliance, but that's particularly true here. And what's working in the beginning may not work longer term. And what's necessary at the beginning of a reopening may not be necessary longer term as we continue to understand more about how the virus really spreads, what the risks are, and what steps would take to make a difference and keep people safe.
One of the questions I'm asked a fair amount, and probably because it's on everyone's mind, is testing. Right now, that seems to be one of the biggest frustrations, that people can't get tested. There are not enough testing kits. The testing kits that exist may or may not have too many false positives. How can employers begin to get a handle on this? Do they just simply have to follow the news, or are there more sources for information on testing that they could go to?
I mean, that is very difficult and a hard thing for companies that can't really generate large number of tests on their own. If you're not kind of the superpower in the corporate world, you are often more dependent on kind of sources of information, sources of tests, sources of valid tests. I think in a few weeks, as we learn more about what will be available and how to really follow up on that, we'll be in a better place. But right now, I think it's very hard for small, medium, even larger companies to ensure that their employees can get tests kind of when needed. There are certain screening mechanisms that a number of companies have done and continue to do, even though temperature is not always something that's associated with coronavirus, and we know that there are many asymptomatic carriers. We do know a number of companies that are doing temperature screening before employees are coming back to work, as well as questionnaires. Temperature screening on every employee when you're coming in and coming out. If you're in a manufacturing facility, for example, you have to count in the dawn in, dawn off, all those, that time, that could be very costly. And so some employers are looking at mechanisms to reduce the number of individuals that can be screened through using thermal imaging cameras and other things. This is not perfect. It's not fail-safe, but I think employers have to be creative and think about these options, because it does not appear in the near term that we're going to get huge number of tests, or that we're going to have, immunity passports or anything else that would give employers the confidence that everyone coming in is corona-free.
Julie, Guidepost works internationally quite a bit as well. Is your international work, or the same sort of guidelines and issues that we've talked about in this podcast, are those the discussions you're having with your international clients or U.S. companies doing business internationally that you're assisting them with?
Absolutely. One of the matters that we just won recently in late February was a financial crime job that was focused in on Milan. And we were scheduled to be, per a federal order, scheduled to be in Milan in mid-April, and all of the work was going to be done in Milan or in other parts of Europe. So, obviously that couldn't occur, even though it was required by regulation, by a financial crime regulation. It was not going to be permitted given the coronavirus and the risk to those employees and to ourselves, and the travel bans and all of that. And so we've had to work and look through, for them and for us, what's safe, and also are there alternative means to review data and to look at things. And I would say that one thing that's really complicating this kind of work going forward and doing it in a remote manner are all the privacy laws, right? GDPR, as well as the California law and other things, are making it even more difficult for data to travel. And so sometimes personnel were traveling, like the old days, you would travel there to avoid the data from having to travel and dealing with problems for the privacy laws. So it is quite complicated. We are seeing in Europe, this is the end of April, we are seeing in Europe that things are starting to, ease up there first. I think even ahead of Governor Kemp and Governor Abbott. And so hopefully they're going to have some success over there and Germany and some other places, and we can build on their best practices in the U.S.
Julie, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time, but I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me today. It's been a fascinating discussion, and as we move through this crisis, I hope I can visit with you again.
I would love that, Tom. Thank you so much. Please stay safe.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. If you have any questions or you have a topic you would like explored on this podcast, please shoot me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, as a call to action, I would ask if you could to please tell one of your friends about the podcast so we can spread the word out about the newest podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network. Also, if you would leave us a rating on iTunes or a review, it would greatly help get the word out about this most important podcast over the next several months. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me for our next episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. This podcast is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.